How's it going, everyone? My name is Donovan, and in this video I'm going to be doing a review of the book The 48 Laws of Power. So, The 48 Laws of Power is a good book for those who have some interest in psychology or power or morality, and also those who are just interested in historical stories. The difficulty to digest is really low. It's a really simple read, but it is very dense and there is a lot of content to go through, so that's a consideration. As for the key insights, the 48 Laws of Power is basically a book about power and how to obtain it and how to defend yourself from other uses of it. And the way that the book is structured is there's basically 48 laws, and each law has explanation and some stories, and then some of them have a reversal and also some information on what happens if you fail to use this law correctly. So basically, each individual chapter is broken out in a really clear and digestible way. The book is full of all kinds of different historical stories, and that alone makes it a pretty interesting read, just to get these different stories, these different ideas, and kind of see how different scenarios played out in the past. And then, of course, those stories are tied back into the corresponding law that Greene is trying to illustrate. Understanding the laws and applying each of them can be a little bit difficult because there's a lot of nuance in how these things work. And there are a lot of ways that the laws sort of contradict each other a little bit, or how different interactions can make it hard to use. So it can be a little bit tough to look at in terms of how do I holistically kind of use this framework. However, if you use each individual law of power and kind of think about that and how it might apply to you, that's a framing that's a little bit easier to digest. There is one consideration, which is there is a lot of nuance in being able to use these principles to gain power in a way that's actually useful to you as an individual. And this kind of ties into some of the other considerations, which is basically that this book uses a lot of historical context to try to build out kind of these little pieces of advice or nuggets of ways that power work. And many of these examples are using historical, nation states or larger bodies or armies, and isn't necessarily going to be the best way to approach life as an individual. So, for example, there are things like never let your intentions be known. And that might be useful in some contexts like war or sports, but as an individual, that may not be the best possible way to go about your life. The other part of it is there's a lot of these laws that work in the short term but aren't great in the long term. And again, if this is like a war, a one-time thing, a competition, a one-off thing, they may be useful to leverage to gain power in those scenarios, but as just an average individual person going throughout your life, many of these tactics are going to get you in trouble and build a reputation that you don't want. Now, there is some nuance in the book that kind of parses this out, but I think it's really important to note here that this is basically a treatise on power, and it doesn't mean that that's a good way to live your life. Like, most people aren't solely focused on gaining power, and not only that, it often goes against a lot of the things that people do want to build out in their life. So as you go throughout this book, pay careful attention to how the laws are being applied, the full context, and how it applies to you as an individual. Do you think that power is one of the most important things? Is it more important than building relationships? Because a lot of these tactics are going to work in the short term, but burn bridges and set you up for failure. And if you're living in a context where it's a relatively constrained environment, your reputation will start to be built as someone who is just trying to get power, and you'll lose out on some of the more rich relationships. On a related note, Greene talks about humans in a way that is very Hobbesian, or like very Machiavellian, right? There is a lot of, oh, other people are just stupid and we should trick them and manipulate them and use them to do whatever we can. And that goes against a lot of what the philosophy here is at How to Happy. And again, people who act this way tend not to have good outcomes in the long term because we're not, nation states taking over a country and then that's the end of it. We're individuals interacting with others, and these interactions build our reputation, and these individual interactions can come back to haunt us or to benefit us. And so by looking at every interaction as a way to, like, how do I get the most power? How do I get the most power? You can easily find yourself in a position where you actually have no power because you've made too many mistakes and burned too many bridges and hurt too many different relationships. Now, in the book, it tries to parse that out a little bit, but I still think it lands pretty heavily on the side of, people are dumb, manipulate them, do whatever you want. And I just don't think that's a good, viable long term strategy. In addition, even some of the pro social laws included in the book are framed in a way that's very manipulative or trying to take advantage of others. And I just don't see a reason for that, right? These frames set you up to act in a way that you are going to basically hurt people or look down on them in most interactions. And in my experience and in my knowledge and the things that I've, kind of tried out, that just doesn't really work. It sets you up in a really bad place and doesn't allow for genuine connection and a lot of the other things that people in general care about and tend to contribute to happiness. Now, I guess if you happen to be one of the odd individuals that wants power at all costs, maybe this is something to follow, but for the average or for the general person, that's not going to apply. So my advice would be to look at this book through a couple lenses. One is, how are you going to apply, or what pieces can help you individually without really taking down other people or hurting them? Or how you could use these strategies in places where it does make sense, like direct competition, war, sports, things where you're not going to be penalized socially for acting a little bit more in your best interest to try to leverage as much power as you can. If you don't keep this stuff in mind, you're really likely to end up in a position where you're actually hindering your relationships more so than actually getting ahead. So, for this video, here are the associated reflection questions. 1. Power can come in many forms from many places. This book primarily discusses social power. In what situations do you feel most powerful? 2. Power without purpose is unlikely to lead to happiness. If you had more power, what would you use it to do? 3. Much of this book is influencing others to give you more power. How can you leverage others to accomplish more? So, all in all, I think The 48 Laws of Power is an interesting book to kind of read with some caveats in mind. And at the very least, just to see the historical examples, because it's a very well written book. It's just at a higher level. I think it's really important to kind of pay attention to the nuance and how you want to use it and what you think is important, because I think you could easily get some advice out of this book and apply it and end up in a position that you don't want to be. So, with those caveats in mind, I do think it's worth, trudging through and seeing all the examples, but you really have to pay attention to what you're getting out of it. That's all I've got for this video. So, as always, if you have any questions, comments, topics you want me to cover, throw them down in the box below. I'll get to them as soon as I can, and I'll see you next time.
You can check out more content at howtohappy.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date on the videos. We've also got a Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook that you can check out. Reflect, take action, and enjoy life. See you next time.